I used to believe that being part of a family meant something permanent, something unbreakable. No matter how busy life got, no matter how many disagreements happened, I thought blood kept people connected in a way nothing else could, especially when it came to my father. He was the kind of man who didn't speak much at home, but when he did, everyone listened. His words carried weight like final decisions. I grew up thinking that if I worked hard enough, proved myself enough, maybe one day I would earn a place beside him, not just as a son, but as someone he respected. So when I heard about the family business celebration dinner, I didn't think twice. It wasn't even a question in my mind whether I'd be invited. I assumed I would be there, sitting at the same table, hearing the same conversations, maybe even being asked for my opinion for once. That illusion lasted until I saw the Instagram story. It was my cousin's post. A long table filled with laughter, expensive food, crystal glasses, and the soft glow of golden lights reflecting off polished wood. My uncles were there, my aunts were there. Even people I barely recognized were smiling, clinking glasses, posing like they were part of something important. But I wasn't there. I watched the video twice, thinking maybe I had missed myself in the frame. Maybe I was late. Maybe I was in the background, but I wasn't. There was no mistake. I was simply not invited. At first, I told myself there must be a reason. Maybe it was last minute. Maybe it was limited seats. Maybe my father had forgotten to mention it. I kept trying to build excuses for something that already felt wrong in my chest. But the truth became unavoidable when I asked my younger cousin directly. He hesitated before answering, which already told me everything. Uncle said it's a serious meeting. He finally said, "Not for everyone, not for everyone." That line echoed in my head longer than I expected. I didn't argue, I didn't react. I just nodded slowly like I understood, even though something inside me cracked a little in silence. That evening, I waited for my father to come home. I wanted to ask him directly, not angrily, just confused. Like maybe there was a misunderstanding that could be cleared in a single sentence. When he finally arrived, I saw him walking in with the same confident posture he always carried after important meetings. His phone was still in his hand, his attention already somewhere else. "Dad," I called softly. He didn't even look at me at first. "What is it?" I hesitated for a second, then asked, "Was there a family dinner today?" That was when he finally looked at me. His expression didn't show guilt or surprise. It showed something colder, detachment. "Yes," he said simply. I waited for him to continue, to explain, to maybe say there was a reason I wasn't there, but nothing came. So I asked the question that mattered most: why wasn't I invited? He exhaled slowly like I was asking something obvious, something beneath him. "You weren't invited," he said. "This wasn't for you." Those words didn't feel loud. They didn't need to be. They landed in a quiet way that somehow hurt more than shouting ever could. I remember staring at him, waiting for him to soften, to realize what he had just said. But he didn't. He adjusted his cuff like the conversation was already over. Then he added something that stayed with me longer than anything else. "You don't need to be involved in everything." I nodded slowly, even though my chest felt tight. "Okay," I said quietly. And I walked away. But as I reached my room, I realized something strange was happening inside me. It wasn't anger yet. Not fully. It was something quieter, something sharper. A realization that I had just been excluded not by strangers, not by enemies, but by my own father. And somehow that hurt more than I was ready to admit. 2 days passed in a strange kind of silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind that sits on your chest even when nothing is being said. My father acted like nothing had happened. He moved through the house with the same authority as always, taking calls, giving instructions, speaking in that controlled tone that made people lower their voices around him. And I stayed quiet, not because I had accepted what he said, but because I was still trying to understand how easily I had been erased from something that was supposed to include me. Every time I thought about that dinner, I kept replaying his words in my head. You weren't invited. Not I forgot. Not it was limited. Not even next time. Just a clean, final exclusion, like I didn't belong in that picture at all. I told myself to move on, to let it go. But the truth was, something had already shifted inside me. I just didn't know what it would turn into yet. Then the phone rang. It was late afternoon. I remember the light in my room was falling at an angle, soft and orange, when I saw his name flash on the screen. My father. For a second I considered not answering, but I did. Hello, I said. His voice came immediately, sharper than I expected. Not calm, not controlled. Different. We have a problem, he said. I sat up slowly. What kind of problem? A pause. Then the words came out like they had been forced. I need you to arrange $31,000. For a moment, I didn't even respond. I thought I had misheard him. Sorry, I said. $31,000. He repeated faster this time, immediately. Don't ask questions right now. Just figure it out. I blinked, staring at the wall in front of me. The same man who looked me in the eyes 2 days ago and said I wasn't important enough to attend a family dinner was now asking me for more money than most people see in a year. It didn't make sense, or maybe it made too much sense. I leaned back slowly in my chair. What happened? His tone shifted instantly, irritation slipping through. Business issue, delayed payment. Partners are getting aggressive. I'll explain later. Later, I repeated quietly. Yes, just handle it. There was something about the way he said it, not as a request, not even as a favor. As if I was expected to fix it. As if I had always been there for this purpose alone. I swallowed before speaking again. You didn't invite me to the dinner, I said calmly. Silence. It wasn't long, but it was heavy. Then he spoke, colder this time. This is not the time for emotional conversations. I let out a slow breath. My fingers tightened slightly around the phone, but I didn't raise my voice. I'm just saying, I continued. 2 days ago I wasn't part of anything important. Now I'm part of a $31,000 problem. He didn't respond immediately. I could hear faint background noise on his side, voices, movement, tension. Finally he said, You're my son. Don't make this complicated. That line. You're my son. It was supposed to mean something comforting, something binding, but right then, it felt like a role I was only useful for when things went wrong. I stood up and walked toward the window, looking outside without really seeing anything. I'll think about it, I said quietly. A pause again, then he spoke faster, sharper. There is no time to think, I need it today. For the first time, I noticed something underneath his voice. Pressure, fear, not the confident man I knew, not the one who excluded me like I didn't matter. This was someone standing on unstable ground. And somehow, that realization didn't make me feel sympathy. It made me feel aware. Okay, I said again, softer this time. But this time, it didn't sound like obedience. It sounded like observation. I'll see what I can do. Before he could respond, I ended the call. And as the screen went dark, I realized something I couldn't ignore anymore. 2 days ago, I wasn't important enough to sit at their table. But today, I was important enough to save it. After the call ended, I didn't move for a long time. The phone was still in my hand, but it felt heavier than usual, like it carried something more than just a conversation. $31,000. The number kept repeating in my mind, not because it was large, but because of how casually it had been dropped into my life after I had just been dismissed from the same life like I didn't matter. I sat down again, staring at nothing. There was a strange contradiction I couldn't ignore anymore. 2 days ago, I wasn't important enough to be invited to a family dinner. Now I was important enough to rescue a collapsing situation. And somehow, both versions of me were expected to exist without question. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I started doing something I hadn't done in a long time. I started paying attention. Not to emotions, not to memories, but to details. I checked messages. I listened carefully to conversations when my father was on calls. I observed the way his tone changed depending on who he spoke to. Calm with some, forced confidence with others, sharp pauses when things didn't go his way. And slowly, a picture began forming. Not the one he showed at home. Not the powerful, always in control businessman, but something more fragile underneath it, something held together by pressure, deals, and expectations that were starting to slip. The next morning, I heard him on a call in the hallway. I didn't mean to listen, but his voice carried through the slightly open door. The agreement was already signed. No, that clause wasn't disclosed to me. A pause. Then, lower, tighter. We can't afford delay. Just give me 48 hours. When he ended the call, I heard something I had never associated with him before. Silence that wasn't confident. Silence that was thinking under pressure. That was when I understood something was wrong, but not just recently wrong. Long. Standing wrong. And the dinner I wasn't invited to started taking a different shape in my mind. Later that afternoon, I asked my cousin a simple question while pretending it didn't matter. What was the dinner about, actually? He hesitated. That hesitation again. Then he said, just a business thing. Investors, new partners, big deal stuff. But he wasn't looking at me when he said it. So I pushed slightly. All family was there. He scratched his head. Yeah, mostly. I think it was important people only. Important people only. That phrase stuck harder than I expected, because suddenly I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't excluded randomly. I was excluded deliberately, not because I wasn't family, but because I wasn't meant to see something. That night, I opened my laptop and searched the company name quietly. Nothing dramatic, just curiosity, I told myself. But what I found wasn't simple. News mentions, financial updates, a recently signed partnership, a delay in execution, a few vague reports about internal restructuring pressure. Nothing fully clear, but enough to suggest instability beneath the surface. Enough to suggest the dinner wasn't a celebration, it was a negotiation, or worse, damage control. And suddenly, everything made sense in a way that felt uncomfortable. They didn't want me there because I wasn't useful. Or rather, they didn't want me there because I wasn't controlled. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling for a long time. My phone buzzed again. My father. But I didn't answer immediately. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to him. I was observing him. And there is a difference between the two that changes everything. When I finally looked at the screen, I saw his name again. No apology, no explanation, just urgency, and I realized something simple but dangerous. They weren't calling me because I was included. They were calling me because they were running out of options, and silence for the first time felt like power. The phone kept ringing. Not once, not twice, again and again, like urgency was starting to replace pride. I watched his name flash on the screen each time, unmoving. The same name that had dismissed me so easily 2 days ago. The same voice that said I wasn't needed at the table. Now that same voice was trying to reach me like I was the only stable thing left, but I didn't answer. Not immediately. Instead, I sat in silence and let the calls come and go, like waves hitting something that refused to break. It wasn't anger that held me back anymore. It was clarity, because I had finally started to see the pattern. People don't suddenly become important. They become useful when everything else stops working. After the 5th call, the ringing stopped. A few minutes later, a message came in. Call me, urgent, no apology, no explanation. Just urgency dressed up as importance. I placed the phone face down and leaned back in my chair. Strangely, I wasn't shaking. I wasn't confused. I wasn't even emotional anymore. I was calm in a way I had never been before, because something had shifted permanently inside me. I wasn't the excluded son anymore. I wasn't the ignored presence at the dinner table. I was the only option left standing, and they knew it now. 30 minutes passed, then an hour, then my phone rang again. This time I answered, but I didn't speak first. Where have you been? My father's voice snapped immediately. Not relief, not concern, pressure. I stayed quiet. Did you get my calls? He continued. We don't have time for games. I need that money situation handled now. I slowly stood up, walking toward the window again, just like before. I heard, I said calmly, a pause. Then his tone softened slightly. Not out of care, but necessity. Good. So you're working on it. That question. So casual, so expected, like nothing had ever happened between us, like I hadn't been erased from a family dinner 2 days ago. I let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking. I wasn't invited, remember, there it was again. That sentence, the same one I had heard before, but this time it landed differently, because now it wasn't confusion speaking. It was awareness. On the other end, I heard a shift, a breath, a pause that lasted too long. This is not about that, he said quickly. We can talk about everything later. Right now, I need you to focus. I smiled slightly, even though he couldn't see it. Later, that word again, always later. Later explanations, later respect, later inclusion, but urgency. That always came immediately. I understand, I said softly. There was relief in his voice now. Good, so you'll send it. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I spoke again, my voice was steady. I'll handle it. A pause. Finally, he said, exhaling like a weight was being lifted. But I wasn't finished. I'll handle it. I repeated slowly. But I want something clear. His tone tightened again. What now? I walked back to my desk and sat down. 2 days ago, I said, I wasn't important enough to be at the dinner. I wasn't part of anything meaningful. Silence. But now, I continued, I'm the only person you're calling. The silence on the other end grew heavier. I could almost hear the shift in his thinking. The realization that I wasn't just agreeing anymore. I was aware. Finally, I spoke the words that changed everything. So tell me something, am I family when you decide, or only when you need me? No immediate response. Just breathing on the other end, unsteady, controlled no longer, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in that silence. I felt seen, not as a son, not as an afterthought, but as the difference between collapse and survival. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, careful. We'll talk after this is solved, he said, but I already knew what that meant. It meant nothing would change unless I allowed it to. I ended the call, and as the screen went dark again, I realized something simple, but irreversible. They didn't exclude me because I didn't matter. They excluded me because they thought I would always come back when called. And now they were about to learn What happens when I don't?